If we were to say something tonight about selfishness, I'm sure that you've noticed, for example, that a child has no lag between its demands and its satisfactions. That is why a child cries so readily. Now, very often, people never get out of the state of being an infant. And just as soon as they have a craving for something, they want it immediately satisfied.
Travel along, Catholic pilgrims, for 1 year as we learn from Venerable Fulton Sheen, one of the greatest Catholic teachers in modern times. Join me, Amy Thomas, once a week for a short reading out of Bishop Sheen's book, Way to Inner Peace. Welcome back, Catholic pilgrims, to week 23. We are moving into the section on virtues this week. It will be 5 different readings from this section. And this week we're going to be focusing on selflessness. Now, I think all human beings can definitely say that they have struggled with the opposite of selflessness, and that is selfishness. I don't think there's any human being out there that can say that they have never struggled with being selfish. I just think it's one of those things that every human has to battle in some way. And the biggest thing that we can do is be aware that we're being selfish and work to combat that. And I think Bishop Sheen's going to give us some great tips and pointers on how to combat selfishness. So it's a little bit longer reading, so we're going to get started right away. The 3 points I would have you key in on are lust, egotism, and greed. Number 23, selflessness. We all pass through 3 stages: youth, middle age, and maturity. Each has its corresponding passion, which would destroy or impair personality by making it a slave to something low or base. The passion of youth is sex. The passion of middle age is power or ambition. The passion of the mature is avarice. These passions are not base in themselves. No passion ever is. They become base only when consented to against right reason and the law of God. Those who consent to the deordinations of the flesh in youth often sublimate into the ambitious in the 40s, into avaricious in the 60s. The object of their passion has changed, but they have not. In one instance, the object is the body. In the other, the ego or the proud mind. And in the last instance, things, wealth, outside both body and mind. The first excess of the flesh is generally recognized as wrong, but modern civilization does not regard pride or avarice as dirty sins, though they can be just as disastrous as lust. Of the 3, lust, egotism, and greed, the first is the easiest for the spirit to master because its excesses create its own emptiness. Sated flesh love can create a desire for spirit love. But egotism and greed are very difficult to cure because they are inflationary sins. Excesses of flesh deflate, but pride and wealth swell the ego to a point where we can come to believe we are truly great, either because we think we are or because we judge ourselves by what we have rather than by what we are. Since egotism, pride, and selfishness are so dominant in middle age, it is important to concentrate on their judgment. One day, when the apostles were quarreling among themselves as to who was the greatest among them, our Lord placed a child in the midst of them as an example that the littlest is the greatest. Mark 9:35. Later, he followed this act with the words, "Let the greatest among you be like the youngest, and the ruler like one who serves." Luke 22:26. By the divine standard, true greatness is indicated neither by the possession of great abilities nor the buzz of popular applause. Any talent a person has, such as a talent for singing, speaking, or writing, is a gift of God. He has done nothing more to merit it than a child with a beautiful face. If then you have received it, Why do you boast as if it were yours alone? 1 Corinthians 4:7. The richer the gifts, the greater the responsibilities on the day of judgment. When our divine Lord said that the great must be as the least, he made the measure of greatness, usefulness, and service to one's neighbor in his name. Service of others is necessary because it involves the constant repression of those egotistic tendencies in us which exalt us at the expense of others. Aristotle said that the two most degrading tendencies in a human being were towards bad temper and ill-regulated desire. Either one or the other is present in every egotist. He either gets mad at others because they do not praise him or do his will, or he seeks his own pleasure at the expense and shame of others. Service corrects both of these evil tendencies. It removes ill temper by making the person do good to others out of obedience to God's will. A man in love with a woman conceals his ill temper to win her love. A soul in love with God kills his ill temper to be worthy of the love of God. Service also corrects ill-regulated desires by constantly putting the needs of the neighbor before the wishes of the ego. They are selfless because absorbed in other selves, happy because they have no needs except to bestow on their fellow men the overflowing goodness of their hearts. And such selfless souls are always the most popular in offices, schools, clubs, factories, and playgrounds. What a lesson nature teaches us about selflessness. Clouds playing like lambs in the pastures of the sky never keep their treasures of moisture to themselves, but pour them out in the beautiful benediction of rain to a thirsty earth. No drop of water leads a selfish life. There is no breeze without its mission. Human lives were not sent into this world as ornaments. God has prettier things for that purpose. As the bird that sings for others gladdens its own heart with song, as the rivers flee the decay of stagnant self-content to service the mighty ocean, as the sun burns itself out to light a world, so does everything, man included, become good by doing good to others. But if we are to do good to others, they must be loved for God's sake. No moral profit comes from doing good to another because, quote, she can get it for us wholesale, unquote, or from giving gifts to others because of the pleasure they give us. There is not even great merit in doing good to those who love us. If you love those who love you, what reward is there in that? Do not sinners do the same? Luke 6:32. The greatest spiritual profit comes from loving those who hate us, and from giving gifts and dinners to those who cannot give anything in return, for then recompense will be made in the kingdom of heaven. Luke 14:12-14. The inertia of selfish idleness and of greed will best be overcome on our knees, praying for the entrance of the Spirit of love. The mill wheel stops when the rushing waters are stilled. The moving train stops when the hot embers cool, and charity vanishes as the love of God declines. If people only knew how happy they would make themselves if they really helped their neighbor for the love of God, we would soon become a nation with songs in our hearts as well as on our lips. Well, we have a lot to go over, don't we? So let's start back on page 81. And I want to talk about the 3 stages of life. He says we all pass through 3 stages: youth, middle age, and maturity. And there are 3 corresponding passions that people struggle with during those different stages. So for youth, he talks about how, it's sex. The passion of middle age is power or ambition. The passion of the mature is avarice. And so I want to talk about why that is. Why at those stages in our life do we have kind of these separate vices that we struggle with? The reason why I think it's the body or lust during our youth is because that's that time in our life when we're the most healthy, the most robust, oftentimes the most attractive. Time hasn't taken its toll yet. And we're looking around for people to be with, right? We're looking for somebody to marry, somebody to date. And so we can very easily fall into lust. And I think we also recognize at that time, maybe unconsciously, that, we just don't have a lot of things. We don't have a lot of money because we're just starting out. And so greed hasn't quite taken over yet. We're more interested in finding a pretty girl or finding a handsome guy. And so I think lust is the reason why that's what we struggle with in our youth. Then he moves into middle age and he talks about egotism and pride. And why is that? Well, we're moving into that period of our life when we feel like we have to show something for our lives, right? We're out of high school, we're out of college, we're getting into our careers fully now, and we want to be recognized, and we want to, have people honor us and see us as successful. We want to show up to our high school reunions and have, something to tell where people are wowed by what we've done with our lives. And we're also getting to that point in our life where if we don't do something big or very successful or that makes us a lot of money or that is very prestigious, we start to feel like we're missing out or time is running out. And we also feel like we haven't done anything with our lives. And so we really want to do those things, especially with regards to our career, that puff us up, that make us look really good, that make us feel like we have done something in this world. Our life has not been a waste. Look at me. And then we move into what he calls maturity, and avarice or greed is what people tend to struggle with. And what's interesting is he talks about how with youth, it has to do with the body. And with middle age, it has to do with the mind. But then in maturity, it has to do with greed, like what we have, which is outside the body and the mind. So that's very interesting. I found that very interesting that he brought that up. But it's kind of true, isn't it? Because, well, for one, you're getting to that point where you're probably going to retire, and you want to make sure that you have set yourself up, set you and your spouse up, that you can live comfortably. A lot of people, when they retire, they want to have all the nice things. They want to have the nice house, the nice car, the nice boat, the great trips, because we've worked hard, for years and years and years. And now we want to kick back and enjoy these last years of our lives. And so we look around at other people who maybe have more than us at this point, and we start to feel greedy because no one wants to go into retirement scared about money. And so we don't want to be the person at Walmart greeting people because we can't make ends meet. And so we start to feel that, sin of avarice come up, and we want to make sure we have all of the things, all of the toys, all the money so that we are set. And he moves on to the next page to talk about, since egotism, pride, and selfishness are so dominant in middle age, it's important to concentrate on their judgment. And then he tells us the scripture verses where the apostles are like, oh, hey, who's the greatest among us? And Jesus is like, wow, y'all don't get it, do you? And so he goes in to talk about how we need to be serving other people, that the littlest among us, the most vulnerable among us, are going to be the greatest in the kingdom of heaven. And I'm sure that had to have just kind of blown the apostles' minds and probably shamed them a tad, maybe humbled them just a little bit, because that would have been really embarrassing to not have Christ in any way validate them and say, oh, well, Peter, he's going to be the greatest among you all. He didn't do any of that, and he even places a child in their midst. And then he goes on to talk about our talents. And again, I think this is something that in middle age people tend to struggle with, because you've honed your talent usually by that point. You've been working in your career for a long time. You've probably become good at something. And we tend to want to think that that's all our own doing. And we have to remember that our talents and our gifts are given to us by God to be used to bring others to Christ. Now, that doesn't mean we don't use them in the workplace and in our careers. Of course we do. But we have to remember who they come from and the manner that we are meant to use them, and we should never boast about them. I don't think it's bad if you acknowledge that you have a talent or a gift. I think it's important to acknowledge it so that you recognize that this is the area that you're supposed to be working in. I don't think it does anybody any favors when we, kind of play the false humility of saying, "Oh, no, I'm not good at that at all." If you have an amazing singer and you tell them, "Oh my gosh, you are an amazing singer." And then they do the whole, "Oh no, gosh, I'm terrible." You're like, no, you really are. You should use that in church or, for something. When they do the, "Oh, I just like doing it. I'm not really that good." It frustrates us because we see real talent and we know that they're supposed to be using it. So the better thing to say is, "Thank you so much. I do enjoy singing and I love using, this talent wherever I can." That's the better response. It's not boastful, and, it shows that you recognize that it's something that God has given to you. For me, I do believe that one of my gifts is writing and teaching. And it's taken me a long time to be able to say that without feeling prideful. But I totally recognize that those gifts come from God, and I'm meant to use them to glorify Him, to speak truth, to teach people the truth, and I'm glad that that's the gifts that He's given me. I'm happy about that, and I want to use them in the way that He wants me to use them. So then moving on to the next little section down below, he says, "He made the measure of greatness, usefulness, and service to one's neighbor in His name." So I'm going to tell you a little story. Hang with me and then I'll wrap it back up to this. So this past week, somebody sent me a private message and they wanted me to look at an article and they wanted my thoughts on it. And it was an article written by a woman at CNN about marriage. And the first half of the article goes on and on and on about all of the patriarchal wedding traditions that we still hold on to today. Now, as soon as I saw the word patriarchy and patriarchal, I immediately did an eye roll because I know where this is going. And so I knew that I was dealing with a modern day feminist who has an inability to not see the patriarchy in everything. And that's basically how the first half of the article went. She was very upset that we give only engagement rings to women and that some men still ask the father for her hand, and why isn't the woman asking the man to marry her instead of vice versa, and just on and on and on. I'm not going to touch on all those things in this podcast, but you get the gist. The second half of the article was talking about the actual marriage. And again, she was very worried about everything in the marriage had to be equal. And she was talking about how women traditionally do a lot of the housework while men basically get to kick up their feet and do absolutely nothing, according to her. And she was talking about how, before you get married, you need to sit down and you need to basically divide up the jobs in the house completely evenly, and that you need to always be checking and communicating that everything is 50-50, basically. She did not ever want there to be an imbalance at all. I was like, oh, wow, this lady's not going to stay married for very long. And the reason why I'm talking about this is because we see in marriage that people can be very, very selfish. And if we go into marriage, with this idea that everything always has to be split up 50-50, you will never, ever be happy. And the reality is that sometimes one spouse is going to do more than the other. And at other times, the other one's going to do more than the other. And we also have to recognize that just the things that men and women do are different. For example, my husband, will mow the lawn or do things outside to fix the outside of the house, get up on the roof and clean out the gutters and fix things in the car. And those things take a lot of time as compared to some of the things that I do. Whereas I'll do a load of laundry, it takes me maybe 20 minutes to unload the dryer and put in a wash and all that stuff. Or I'll clean up the dishes, which maybe takes me about 20 minutes. Those things are shorter. It looks like I'm doing more, but in the grand scheme of things, it kind of balances out. But the reality is that as spouses and just as people, sometimes we have to recognize that we may be giving more than another person. Maybe they're just not capable at that moment to give of themselves even more. And so we kind of have to step in and help them out. Obviously, people can abuse that. But I was thinking back to when, my husband was deployed. When he was deployed, I was doing 100% of all the household chores and taking care of our kids. He couldn't do it. Obviously, he was off making money, but everything that was in the home that needed to be done was done by me. I had to do 100% of the work. And I was completely and totally fine with it. I mean, there was times when I got frustrated, of course, and, missed him and wanted him home and everything. But it was a service that I was providing. I was in a way kind of serving him because he was, serving our country. He was overseas. He was deployed. He couldn't be home. It wasn't because he just didn't want to help me out. And I was totally fine doing that. It gave me a lot of purpose, and I wanted to do a good job for love of my husband. And I just think a lot of married couples forget that they are to be in service to each other. And when, both the husband and the wife do that, and they are in service to the other, and they're not keeping tally marks, and they're not keeping score, and they're working very hard to be available to the other person, that's what makes a good and lasting marriage. Not when you're trying to divide everything up 50-50 and make sure everybody has everything balanced out perfectly. That just does not work. And so this moves us into the last little part where he talks about service. Now, he's not talking about marriage in our readings today, but just reading about serving other people made me think of that article that I read and how misguided that lady was, and just the service that is required in marriage, just serving each other. But also we have to look at this just throughout our entire lives. We are experiencing here in the United States unprecedented levels of depression, suicide, just apathy. And the message that is being sent is more self-care. Do more self-care. And that's not the answer. People have been told to do more self-care now for several years. More self-love, more self-care, take care of you. You need to spend time taking care of your needs and wants. You. And we're not seeing people, get out of their depression. And we're not seeing people rise above this malaise that has permeated our entire culture with all of this self-love talk. Of course, we should love ourselves, but the focus has become so hyper that that's all people are doing now. Nobody's thinking about others. And if they do, then they do it in that, social justice warrior type of way, which we talked about last week, which doesn't quite ring true, if you want to ask my opinion of it. But the way to get out of feeling down, feeling bad, feeling like your life is lost and hopeless is to serve others. And that's what he talks about here. On page 83, in the second paragraph, he says, service also corrects ill-regulated desires by constantly putting the needs of the neighbor before the wishes of the ego. And so we become more happy when we give to others, when we stop thinking of ourselves all the time and we look for other people to serve, whether that be our spouse, our kids, people in the church, our neighbors. Maybe we have a lonely neighbor who, their spouse has died and they're isolated. Who knows? There are so many people that we can be reaching out to, coworkers. anywhere you go, there's somebody that you can serve in even the smallest of ways, from a compliment, a smile. I mean, those things go a long way. Oftentimes when I'm out shopping, I will try to compliment at least one person. And usually, they're just going about their day and looking ho-hum and whatever. And if I compliment them, their whole demeanor changes and they just light up. They smile, they look me in the eye, they start to talk to me. And, it's the smallest thing. And I'm not giving them compliments and lying or anything. I truly find something to compliment them on and then share it with them. And it's a small service, if you want to call it that. I'm reaching out to a fellow neighbor, a fellow, human being, and trying to brighten their day. And it does go a long way to doing that. And so I think if we get outside of our own heads, look around ourselves, get your face out of your phone and look around at people, you're going to find somebody who needs you in some way. Even if it's something as small as just paying attention to them, saying hi, saying hello, something like that. We've so isolated ourselves that people are being neglected and kind of forgotten. And that makes them sad and depressed. And then we're not, happy either because we're just self-focused. And so I think this is truly the answer. If you are ever feeling down in your life, feeling like you're not doing anything with your life, you're just so sad, you can't get out of a funk, find some way to serve somebody else. Now go to a pregnancy resource center and volunteer. Invite somebody over for dinner. Go talk to a neighbor. Do something. Get out of your own head. I love the last page and a half. He talks about all the things in nature. The clouds playing like lambs. They don't keep their moisture. The breeze, always has a mission, to cool us off. The bird who gives us its song. The rivers that flow. And even the sun, it burns itself out to light a world. And we do see in nature that things give of themselves through song, through beauty, through light, through rain. And I just thought that was such a beautiful thing to think about. And that's what we are called to do as well. And he says here at the very bottom, if people only knew how happy they would make themselves if they really helped their neighbor for the love of God, we would soon become a nation with songs in our hearts as well as on our lips. So let's take that message with us this week. That is all for today. I will see you back here for week 24. And until then, live the faith boldly and travel well.